Welcome to the recorded version of Caring for Someone with Alzheimer's, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
All right, our speaker today is going to be Molly Carpenter. Molly is an author, speaker, trainer, and family caregiver and brings years of personal and professional elder care experience and training to families dealing with dementia. Molly works with a team responsible for ensuring that Home Instead Senior Care's network of 60,000 caregivers worldwide have the resources necessary to effectively provide quality care in the home and understand the importance of their work enhancing the lives of those they serve. Molly holds a Bachelor's of Science in Family Science with a gerontology specialization from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a master's degree in education with a gerontology specialization from the University of Nebraska-Omaha. And with that, I'd like to welcome our presenter for today, Molly Carpenter. Thanks for being here, Molly.
Thank you, Steve, for that warm welcome, and welcome all of you today to our webinar. I'm very excited to be with you. I hope you're enjoying nice fall weather in your location as we are here in ours, so welcome today. And actually, this is a topic I'm pretty passionate about, and there's a lot of content to cover today, so I want to get started right away with our objectives on the next slide, because we know our family caregivers need support around Alzheimer's disease and dementia. That's why all of you are attending these webinars each month. And we're going to continue to develop resources around this disease for our family caregivers. So we're going to keep talking today about understanding symptoms, and mostly we're going to talk about the behavioral symptoms, how to minimize them, and we're going to talk about those symptoms so much because that's really what makes this disease difficult to cope with. And so we've really got to keep honing in on skills on how to be better caregivers. And all of you, as you walk through this and learn, hopefully from a few stories today, some easy ways to translate this to families so that they can provide some great care. Also, we're going to talk about some different support strategies. We're going to always, as we do every time on this webinar, talk about resources, but today I feel like we have an even bigger abundance of resources to share with you today. So that'll be great. We'll save that more towards the end of the call. But again, the goal of today or this webinar is really to help all of you feel more comfortable as you talk to families that are going through this disease. And you've got to be arming them with lots of information. I'm sure a lot of you have the experience, but for those of you that don't, this is a great topic. But for those of you that do, you may get some new information today to help you give them great information to be more confident. So I'm going to start, I always like to start these webinars with the numbers. And let's look at the next slide and kind of level set and put some context around this disease. And I know some of you have heard these numbers, and every time I see them, I'm absolutely frightened by them. But in the U.S., our Alzheimer's Association reports that in 2014, there were 5 million people that had some type of dementia, 5 million people. And in Canada, in 2010, more than 500,000 Canadians had Alzheimer's disease or related dementia. Another startling stat is every 67 seconds, somebody develops Alzheimer's disease, and it's the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. Now, the reason we're all here to talk about family caregivers today, well, you can see why. We have over 15 million caregivers providing over 17 billion hours of care. That is a lot of care and a lot of burden put on these family caregivers. So, again, just want to put some context around why we're here today and why we're talking about this. But let's look at a few more stats on the next slide as we talk about family caregiver stress. And since having dementia, involves the memory loss, some judgment changes, and the ability for really a person to take care of themselves, it's a very stressful and demanding job. And 60% of our family caregivers that are caring for people with Alzheimer's have, told us or rated that they have very high emotional stress. So it's one of those cognitive or chronic diseases that really causes a lot of high stress with our family caregivers. And we look at about a third of our family caregivers report symptoms of depression, which is very alarming, and we can imagine that a little bit. But let's look at, on the next slide, what this is also doing to isolation. We've done a survey recently here at Home Instead Senior Care, and 74% of our caregivers that we surveyed reported that they are feeling isolated. And they say that is because it's a difficult role, and it can be very overwhelming. And so it kind of leads to them leaving the house less frequently. They feel a reduced quality of life, and they stay home because it's easier, because, you know, those symptoms with dementia and Alzheimer's are very unpredictable. So basically, in a nutshell, their quality of life is lessening. It's getting worse, these family caregivers. So that's why this is such an important topic today for us to go through. I'm hoping, again, after today, that you can help these family caregivers overcome this fear and gain some confidence and not become isolated and depressed, as the stats and the slides are telling us so far. You're going to hear a theme throughout today. I'm going to mention it a few times, but when it comes to isolation and getting out of the house, we all know how important that is, and we know how important it is to socialize. So one of the themes of today is I know a lot of you've heard about this movement about an Alzheimer's friendly business. And Home Instead Senior Care, we've recently done a lot of work around this as well, trying to do our part in educating businesses locally on becoming friendly when somebody with Alzheimer's comes into the store or whatever it is, that they're prepared to help and handle that. And that kind of a notion is really going to help family caregivers get out a little bit more. But we're going to talk about that kind of throughout today, so you'll hear this a few times. Okay, let's look at a quick refresher of the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease on the next slide. And I'm not going to read these word for word to all of you because I know you're familiar with these symptoms. They are from the Alzheimer's Association, and these are the most common symptoms. And I show you these for a couple reasons. Number one, these are the 10 signs is what the Alzheimer's Association calls them. And the Alzheimer's Association has some great resources around these. But the other thing is the reason I show these all the time in whatever presentation I do is because this can help families identify if there's something to even be concerned about, if there's nothing diagnosed yet. So I draw these out again just to make sure that you're aware of these signs and symptoms. There's, like I said, some great resources on the Alzheimer's Association's website about the 10 signs, and really helping families recognize when there is a concern or an issue. Now, when you think about these 10 signs or symptoms, and you think about all the different symptoms of Alzheimer's disease and dementia, that it can be a little bit overwhelming for a family. So on the next slide, I want to take this down another level, which I found has been very helpful for families. And it's really to put the symptoms into categories. And first, I want you to notice, have you noticed I've been referring to these words as symptoms and not behaviors? You know, a lot of times in the industry, we say things like we need to manage behaviors, or there's challenging behaviors with Alzheimer's or difficult behaviors. But when we use that word behavior, we're conveying that the person is acting out, which they might be doing something a little bit different, and that's true. But when we say behaviors, it can sometimes put the notion on that the person might be doing it on purpose, or that they can have some kind of control over it, when really we all know that that isn't possible with these kind of symptoms. When we say things like managing behavior, again, we are saying that we have some sort of control over these symptoms. And we might have a little bit of control over the environment that we're providing. Our family caregivers might have a little control over that, but we really don't have control over the symptoms. And so I get a little bit crazy about talking about these behaviors as symptoms rather than as behaviors. And then I want to challenge you all to think about it. But because think about when we say difficult or challenging, we're labeling the behavior already, and it can be even worse and when you put that negativity on that word. So we're really, you got to think about, is it difficult or challenging for the person with Alzheimer's, or is it difficult for the caregiver? And the answer is it's usually difficult for the caregiver. So it really doesn't even make sense to call it a challenging behavior because it's really challenging for the caregiver. The person with Alzheimer's is just trying to communicate with us, and their brain is failing, and they may not have the words, so they're showing the caregiver. So again, I get a little bit on the soapbox about this conversation, so I challenge you all to think about that and start calling these behavior symptoms. Changing that entire conversation, you watch what happens. It puts an emphasis on that disease causing the problem rather than a person causing a problem. And then again, like I said, distinguishing that there's two types of symptoms is helpful to talk to families about. So there's cognitive symptoms and there's behavioral symptoms. You can see on the slide what some examples of both of those are. And when we start to explain, cognitive and behavioral symptoms, it's again getting us focused on what is really happening, what is the need present. Some of the behavioral symptoms can put the safety of the person or others at risk. Some of the symptoms can be frustrating, again, for the family caregiver. But when we mention the word, behaviors or symptoms, that's where families get really nervous and they fear that uncertainty. So let's look at the next slide. I use this chart a lot with families to really give some perspective on the whole discussion. Because what this chart does, it provides a general ranking of the symptoms in terms of frustration, difficulty, and danger. It kind of gives perspective because when people hear the word Alzheimer's, again, they're fearing they're fearing dread, and they have a lot of fear. And some of the symptoms can be frustrating to deal with, like repetition. So when someone repeats that same question over and over, it's really not harming the person with Alzheimer's, but it is probably driving the caregiver a little nuts. But it's really important for caregivers to get a perspective on these different types of symptoms. And then when you think about things like wandering, okay, that can be very serious, and immediate action is being taken. So again, when you hear the word when a family hears the word Alzheimer's and we say, oh, they're going to have these symptoms, behavioral symptoms, everybody gets very, very nervous. And if we can put it into perspective of some things are frustrating and some things, yes, are going to be hard, like wandering, then that also gives a family a different kind of a sense of what they're having to cope with. So in general, these symptoms usually arise when a person has an unmet need. And again, the language is often affected by dementia. So people with this disease, they're trying to tell you something, but they're showing the family caregiver instead. And so by acting a certain way, they're trying to communicate what they want or what they need. And so we need to help our family caregivers listen to what they're doing and really understand these unmet needs. And this is a very simple, what I call a quick check. And when I talk to families, I talk to them think about just these four things: your emotions, your social needs, your physical needs, and your environment, and assess the situation. Think about it. Are they sad? Are they tired? Are they in too crowded of a place? Are they hot? Are they hungry? Those kind of things. So again, I show you this as, again, just a quick way to talk to families about assessing an unmet need of a person that has Alzheimer's. Now, it's really important that we understand that when something's unmet, or if somebody's cold, they may start showing a symptom. They may start pacing. They may start shivering. They may start getting agitated because they're freezing. And that can sometimes be pretty easy to figure out from a family caregiver. They might be shivering, so you give them a sweater. But what if it's the person starts getting agitated and they're crying, and you're kind of going through the checklist, the family's going through the checklist, and they can't really figure it out. How are we going to redirect, or how are we going to change that situation? And so let's look at the next slide, because really the answer is all in the approach. And we call it relationship-centered care. Person-centered care is the same thing. And it's basically, I know a lot of you are aware of what person-centered care is, and I hope a lot of you are using it in your settings. But the great news to communicate to families is that they have all the information they need at their fingertips. They probably already have a close relationship or a pretty good relationship with the person that has dementia. So they can have some success in this role and really provide good days for that person that has this disease. So we need to encourage the family to hone in on that person's experiences, their life story, their routines, their preferences, knowing their hobbies, knowing their favorite things. This really helps caregivers have the tools to redirect, like we just talked about when we said the person's sad. You know, if the person's sad and we know they love ice cream, we might, you know, say, you know what, I'm sorry you're down today, but let's go get an ice cream cone. So again, having that information at their fingertips is the key. And it also is the key in helping the person with Alzheimer's maintain a meaningful life and be engaged in life. And can you imagine, all of you out there, talking to a family and saying, here's what you have to do to make sure this person lives a meaningful life? It's this simple. So I hope you're as excited about it as I am. But it's good information. It's information that I don't know if people necessarily think about all the time. So again, let's go back to the example if it's a crowded area. A family's out, it's crowded, the person starts getting agitated. They're going to have to know, okay, first of all, they've done their check and they know it's too crowded here and this person's getting agitated, but then they're going to have to know, what can I say to redirect them out of this situation, not to cause additional panic and escalate the behavioral symptoms. So, you know, that's just one of the great things about being a family caregiver is you've got a lot of information that can help succeed in this role. So I want to show you how this works. I'm going to share two stories with you. And one's a story, or both are stories about a behavioral symptom. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the situation. I'm going to tell you what I've sensed or could see are the unmet needs in the person. And then we'll talk about some ways that they might approach the situation and approach the care. And then I also like to talk about conversation starters. And it's different when you start to change the way you talk about these symptoms and you help families understand that that's really just an unmet need. You'll be shocked about how the way the conversation changes. And I'm going to share some examples of what I've heard families say over the years once they understand that this is a disease and that their job is to meet the needs of the person. So I'm going to share a couple of these with you. So let's start on the next slide. And this situation, this family caregiver noticed that her father became aggressive during personal care, which aggression we would call a behavioral symptom. And this caregiver basically said that every time we tried to push him to do something, he didn't want to do it, mainly the personal hygiene things. And even in the last year of his life, it got to be so difficult to get him to change his clothing or to shave or to even bathe him. Now, I don't know all about all of you out there, but I think this is probably the most common example I hear about from family caregivers on a very regular basis. It's always around, it's a lot around, I shouldn't say always, it's a lot around personal care. So when I read that or hear that from a family caregiver, let's look at the next slide, because some of the unmet needs that I'm thinking about, just if I go through my little like 4 checklists here, you know, is the person tired? Are they in pain? Are they scared? Are they emotionally no lack of control? Is that the problem? Is it hard to accept care from a daughter? How about the environment? Is it cold? Is it a safety concern? I don't know if a lot of you have seen the movie or heard about the Glenn Campbell documentary. And I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it'll come up if you Google Glenn Campbell. And his wife, what the biggest challenge to get Glenn to do personal care was the room was freezing. So obviously he's an entertainer and he's on the road a lot. And so when they're in hotel rooms, she would go in the bathroom and turn on the hair dryer to warm the room up and then she could get her husband, Glenn Campbell, to go in and take a shower. So again, Kim, his wife, was already thinking about what were his needs, and I've got to meet him so that I can help him get the shower that he will need and that will make him better. So that's one, kind of care approach when you look at these different unmet needs. But let's look at some other care approaches on the next slide. Now, what this family caregiver did that I originally started the story with, the family caregiver's name was Miss Liza. She started with bed baths. That was their sort of answer. And they did no rinse bathing wipes. They did dry shampoo. They would also take him for walks and get him some exercise so that he was a little bit more, I wouldn't say tired, but just a little bit more laid back, more relaxed, if you will. And then, again, my favorite technique that this family used is they would sing to him as a method to sort of decrease that aggressiveness, because this person would actually get combative during personal hygiene. So this Miss Liza would start a song and get him to make eye contact, and they would sing a song that her father knew, and he would sing right along with, and he would be focusing on the song that he could still sing and still do, and kind of forget for a minute and let the bath aid really help get the personal care done immediately. So again, she knew what her father's likes and dislikes were. She knew his routines. She understood what some of his unmet needs were, and she came up with solutions to minimize that behavioral symptom. Okay. I am going to, let's look at the next slide and look at some of the conversation starters that Miss Liza used when she was approaching this with her father. So even just a note of, we'll get through this together, Dad, or boy, this hot shower is going to be over before you know it. And sometimes she did have to walk away where it just wasn't going to be a good day, and try again later. So when you think about these conversation starters or some of the phrases, the whole conversation changes from this notion of pushing and we have to do this now, Dad. Come on, you need to take a shower, and here's the reasons why. And you've always taken a shower. You know the common phrases that family caregivers are saying. But when you think about it from the approach of an unmet need, and I have the tools at my fingertips to meet those needs, then the conversation completely changes. So I share some of those with you just so you can see some of the benefits of this different techniques. The other thing, let's look on the next slide. The other thing to talk to families about is prevention techniques. And this comes up a lot when we're discussing, I know a lot of you have this conversation. I've had this conversation 100 times where somebody will say, well, I tried to give Dad a bath and it didn't work. What should I do? And so some of these things on this slide, planning ahead and don't overschedule, being sensitive to the most alert and most tired times a day, being aware of the best, what worked last time and what didn't work, so keeping a journal. And this what could we have done differently, really, that's really a proactive or prevention kind of a conversation. So in the future, Liza learned right away that there were some things that she could do to make this go better in the end. And so if we can talk to our families about setting things up for success, or again, it's about being aware of those needs and being aware of the schedule and the timing and all of those different things. So as you're talking to families, having that conversation about, being proactive and thinking ahead, that is a great thing to consider as well. Okay, I want to share one more story with you, and let's start with that on the next slide. And this is the story about wandering. And this is more, I guess it's really not a story, it's just a family caregiver I've talked to who the behavioral symptom with her husband was wandering. And this gentleman would always go to the fire station that was about 5 houses down. So this spouse, this wife, she gave the fire station a picture of him and her name and address and phone number, of course, all of those things. And the firemen would take this gentleman into the break room, get him a cup of coffee while they called the spouse. And so that ended up being an okay, it's a very hard situation, but because he went to the fire station, it was pretty manageable for this family caregiver. Although one morning, she realized that he was gone, and she called the fireman, and he wasn't there, but it turns out he had went to church in his pajamas. So actually this family caregiver can look back and have a little bit of a chuckle from that now, but of course at the time it was a very, very terrifying situation. And so let's look on the next slide about some of the unmet needs of this gentleman. And so of course we've got to think about environments. The family caregiver, he was very, very active. And so she learned right away that they have got to go on regular walks. She was just always nervous about going on walks with him because he was faster than her. So what she realized is that's when they joined a gym. And she would go, very small gym, and she would go and they would walk around the track together. Or if they didn't go to the gym that day, there was a school nearby where they could walk around a track if school wasn't in session, for example. So she realized environment was a big thing, also realized he was a little bit bored, needed some activities. So those were the unmet needs that this family caregiver started to discover with her husband starting to wander. Okay, and then on the next slide, let's look at some of the care approaches that this family caregiver used. Now, basically, she tried to accompany him at first, and she tried to divert some of his attention. She also started, like I said, the regular exercise, and if it was raining or one of those snowing, whatever kind of situation, bad weather, she would take him for a car ride. So she came up with some great care approaches. Obviously, her taking her picture to the firehouse, all of that was definitely a great care approach. And I know a lot of us, I know one of our top recommendations in the field, I'm sure all of us say this, is sewing some kind of a, and this is more of maybe a proactive thing, is sewing the identification into the person's clothes or jacket kind of a thing. So these were just some of the care approaches that this family used as well. And then let's look on the next slide at some of the conversation starters. Now, she started in the beginning, can I go on the walk with you? You know, or he would pace occasionally prior to wandering, but she didn't know he was going to, like at first when that started happening, that was one of the signs. And so it was, you know, she would say, just sit down and relax. You know, what's wrong? Why are you pacing? When really, once she figured out what was happening, and that was sort of a trigger to a wandering episode, she would try to reassure him, like, oh, we're going to go to the gym in 10 more minutes, or we're going to go for our walk soon, or we're going to go on our car ride, whatever it might be. So again, just changing that conversation, understanding why the pacing's occurring, understanding what that unmet need is, and then having conversations to support that unmet need, and that the caregiver is going to help very soon. Okay, let's look at some prevention ideas on the next slide. And here's where we talk about that identification in a jacket or an ID bracelets. Again, a current photo is really good for families to have in a preventative matter in case wandering occurs. Unfortunately, the thing with wandering is oh, they'd never do that. Well, the disease is so unpredictable, we just don't know if they would ever do it or not do it. So it's very important to be prepared. And this caregiver was not prepared. So after the first time this happened, that's when she started to think, oh, I need a photo, I need to tell the fire department my name and phone number, I need to tell the neighbors, and she started to educate others around that as well. But again, when we talk about educating others, this is again a great opportunity to take it a step further than just the neighbors, and to really start thinking about educating businesses about becoming friendly, Alzheimer's friendly. Again, there's some great resources out there, and it's a great proactive step for families to encourage the local businesses that they frequent on a regular basis to encourage them, these businesses, whether it's the grocery store or the church or this fire department, you know, being prepared on how to interact. you can imagine the first time that this gentleman wandered to the fire station, it was very intimidating. They were nervous. They were suspicious, like, who's this guy? And they were asking him all kinds of questions. And it probably was a nightmare, if I had to guess, for the person, the gentleman that had Alzheimer's disease. So it took, and the wife did a great job explaining to the fireman what was happening. And, hey, he'll go to your break room if you just offer him some coffee. Again, she knows him so well. She knows what would get him to sit down and relax until she got there. So it's, again, about helping this family caregiver. She may want to go to her local grocery store or the church and encourage them to get some more information about becoming friendly for all people with Alzheimer's. So it's just, again, it's a more of an education piece for our families, but by gosh, if we can get them to stay out and stay active, that is very, very important. And then another really important step in prevention when it comes especially to wandering or even just with Alzheimer's disease, there's a lot of safety proofing of the home that we can do. So when it comes to wandering, I've seen so many creative ideas. I've seen where people change the positions of the locks on the door, or they put a stop sign or do not enter on doors or stairwells. They might put up the caution tape, even if nothing's broken. People are pretty used to that yellow tape as being, oh, I don't want to go there, kind of a deal. So again, as you're talking with families, these are some great prevention ideas as well. Okay, so before we move on to supporting family caregivers and talking about resources, I want to summarize where we've been because I feel like we've covered a lot of information today already. But first was we talked about some of the statistics and some of the symptoms, and we spent a lot of time talking about how to speak about these behavioral symptoms and helping families understand the types. And we've also talked about helping our families understand that there is an unmet need and that can cause some of those symptoms to come out. And so to be prepared for those and to think about it in a proactive and preventative nature. And I hope as we walk through these last couple of scenarios, that you can see how a simple example can really resonate with a family caregiver. And it really is I know I'm going into grave detail with these stories. You can absolutely shorten them, if you will, but it's a quick way to just give a family it's when you just say there's an unmet need and here's some things to think about, and you've got to think about redirecting them or however you're going to do it. It's a really quick practice to put into place, and it really can help them cope with caregiving a lot quicker and a lot simpler. Okay. Let's go to the next slide and start looking at support strategies. Now, again, I know I call you guys all cheerleaders every month. You really are the cheerleaders out there. You're encouraging these families. You're doing so much for them and helping them. And with this disease, there is a lot of emotion present. And you may be working with a family caregiver who won't ask for help, or maybe this is a caregiver who doesn't want this as a full-time role, or maybe this is a caregiver who wants to control it all. And we know that a lot of those things don't work when it comes to Alzheimer's disease. So there's just a few concepts or a few things that I want you to sort of have in your back pocket. So as whatever type of caregiver you're talking to, you've got some information or some nuggets of information that you can talk with these families about when they're going through this. So first of all, as we've said before, Alzheimer's disease, it affects your mental functions, of course. And so, caring for somebody is going to be a challenge. And one of the things that I think is crucial for family caregivers to understand is that they are going to have to change a little bit to be successful in this role. Let me give you one example. When a person with Alzheimer's disease starts talking about their mother who is deceased, the role of the caregiver is not to correct them and say, Mom, your mother's been dead 30 years or whatever it is. which is a natural human behavior. It's a natural thing that we all want to do. There's nothing wrong. It's exactly what we're born and built to do. But when you're caring for somebody with Alzheimer's and they start to talk about a deceased member of their family that's been deceased for many, many years, the caregiver has to change from a correction standpoint to a validation standpoint, meaning, boy, Mom, I'm really sorry that you're missing your mother today, or maybe you're missing your mother today. Tell me a great story about her. So it's really about not bringing the person with Alzheimer's back to reality, but validating how they're feeling. The other thing about change is that this is all about living in their moments. And I use this example because, that I just mentioned, I use it because it talks about validation. And you have to practice this, because being in their moment, in their reality, if they're missing their mother, that takes a lot of practice not to correct. My grandmother, I know I talk about her a lot. She did not have Alzheimer's, but towards the last year of her life, her dementia got worse. And she really, my mother still wanted to correct her sometimes. Not always, but she still wanted to correct her when she said something wrong, you know, a lot of times it was the date or the day. I would say things like, yep, time is just flying by, even if it was the wrong date, she said. So it's so hard. It takes so much practice. And the other thing I'll say about change is that how the family caregiver is feeling, how they're reacting, their tone of voice, their mannerisms, you know when somebody's upset or anxious or mad. You can tell. Well, guess what? So can the person with Alzheimer's disease. So when you think about this role, this is why this is so hard, because there's so many things that we have to put aside as family caregivers. There's so many things that we're used to doing just as human beings that we have to change and put aside. So think about those things. I know I'm obviously telling you in great detail, but think about some of those things as you're talking with family caregivers, making sure they understand that sometimes this is going to require them to change how they normally want to be. But the other thing, another concept that we need to share with families is that this is doable. To be a family caregiver, it's definitely doable. You've seen it so many times. I've seen it. It can be done. It's done all over the world. It's just finding the right support. Maybe it's finding others that are in the same boat. It's finding ways that they're, can be successful in this role. So I think a lot of times when you hear Alzheimer's, it's like, oh no. And of course there's a negative feeling about it. But really there is an opportunity here. It can be successful. It is successful a lot of the time. And so it is doable. So we don't want to paint the picture that it's so bad that it's not even a doable deal. So balancing how much you talk about, being this is going to be so hard versus pepping them up and like, you can do this, sort of. Again, I call you all cheerleaders all the time. And then one size does not fit all. This is really hard about all of your roles, because what might work for one caregiver may not work for the next caregiver. And so that's why I'm glad you guys get on these every month, because you learn so much information to have in your back pocket to talk to different people. And then it's another great piece of advice or support strategy is really talking to them about doing what you can when you can for and with the family member. And it's okay if they have to ask for help. We're not superhuman beings, as much as we'd all like to think that. We all have our times when we need help and support. So really making sure that the family caregivers know that they can only do what they can do, and it's okay to ask for help. Okay, on the next slide, let's talk about some more tangible options for caregivers. Those are just some concepts that you might talk through. And I'm not going to go in great detail with these, because I think these are probably most of the things that you already recommend. Obviously, more education, getting some respite, support groups, social networks. I'm going to talk about a couple of those options. I've got some actual resources to share on most all of these topics that we'll get to in just a second, so that you you actually can give somebody a website or a book or whatever it might be to help them cope through this disease. So let's start on the next slide with one of those resources, and that's a book called Confidence to Care. A lot of the concepts I talk through today are in this book, and this book is really about helping family caregivers understand those symptoms and understand how to meet the needs. And it has lots of care approaches and lots of conversation starters and prevention techniques. So it's a very proactive book, very simple kind of a resource to use. And on the next slide, there is an app that goes right along with that book. And this app is free, and it's in the App Store, and it's called the Alzheimer's or Other Dementias Daily Companion. And this app is fantastic. It has lots of tips, and this is one of those great apps where you can type in a scenario, or you can type in bathing help, and several different options will come up to help somebody get through or navigate the situation that they're in. There's information from, obviously, from a lot of the resources that at Home Instead that we use and tie to. There's a lot of Alzheimer's Association resources within the app, and there's also a 24-hour phone access to the toll-free phone number or an email. So if somebody has a question, they need to call somebody, there's a phone number for that caregiving assistance line. And the other last thing I'll say about this app is we've had caregivers, they can submit their own ideas and their own advice. So they can pop in, oh, I have a tip I want to share, and they'll type in a tip, and then next time that question comes up, that tip is included in the list of options and solutions. Okay, let's go to the last slide on resources and talk through some of these. Help for Alzheimer's Family is a great website that just has all Alzheimer's focused resources. I encourage you to send families there. Caregiverstress.com is another website that's, it's not Alzheimer's specific, although there's lots of Alzheimer's information there, but it's very great for caregiver stress, and I think we talk about that one quite a bit on these webinars, so I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that one. The Best Friends Approach, that's a book written by David Troxell and Virginia Bell. It's, again, a little bit about that concept of the person-centered care and how when you really know the person, you can provide such quality care and personalized care and meaningful activities. Some great concepts in there. And then I put the website up for the AlzheimersFriendlyBusiness.com. That's something I encourage you all to send local businesses to really get some more information about becoming Alzheimer's friendly and getting some training around being Alzheimer's friendly. There's a decal for the storefront if that's that kind of a place. So there's some great benefits to that, and I encourage you to use it, and I encourage you to have our families that you talk to encourage their local businesses to use it. And then, of course, I would never not put the Alzheimer's Association down as a resource. So much information, very, very, lots of great information on Alzheimer's disease. There's one more resource that I don't have listed that really isn't a tangible resource, but it's just a concept that that's made a pretty big movement in the field recently that I wanted to add on here, and that's really about early detection. Now, I know that's kind of a hard topic when we're talking to kind of a stressed out family caregiver, but even talking to different family members that may not have Alzheimer's or dementia, we really need to encourage our families to get screened earlier for detection. It's very key in planning and navigating the disease. And the good news is that most seniors and baby boomers are on Medicare, or they soon will be on Medicare. And each year, Medicare offers an annual wellness visit. And in that annual wellness visit now includes a cognitive assessment. So it's just one of those deals when they're at their annual Medicare annual wellness visit, start talking to their doctor about the assessment, start asking the questions, helping the families understand the signs and getting more familiar with that concept. We all know that the quicker but even establishing a baseline is important, but even understanding where they're at with their cognitive abilities, understanding the signs, and if there is anything, detected, obviously there's a lot more workup to do on that. But it's a free benefit. The cognitive assessment is a free benefit with the wellness check, and so I wanted to make sure I included that today so that you all are aware of that. I'm sure you are, but it's another one of those avenues to tell families to start to proactively think ahead. Okay, I want to thank you all for your time today, and thank you for getting on this webinar and learning all about this. I am going to now turn this over to Steve for some questions.
All right. Lots of great information, Molly, as always. It is time for the Q&A portion of the webinar. As you can see from the slide up on the screen right there, just type in your questions for Molly, and we will get to them here. Molly, can you just repeat for us real quick the name of the app that you were talking about a minute ago that can be downloaded?
Yes, it is called the Alzheimer's and Other Dementias Daily Companion. Alzheimer's and Other Dementias Daily Companion.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Next question. I'm really impressed by the ideas to help manage care while living at home. What are the most common factors used to determine that someone cannot be cared for at home any longer?
That's a great question, and I think that really is it's hard to really give a absolute yes or no, or yes, these are the three things, for example. Now, just in my experience, well, first let me say this. The reason it's so hard to be black and white on that is because it depends on the family, it depends on their resources, and it depends on the home and how the home is set up. So in a situation where a person with Alzheimer's disease becomes completely bedridden, I mean, there's a lot to consider, and that is, as disease progresses, that can occur. So there's a lot to consider in that case, whether the family caregiver can handle all of that intense care, meaning like having Hoyer lifts in the home, being able to, feed the person, because obviously at that point they may not be being able to hold a spoon or a fork. So I think it really depends on the family and where they're at with the amount of people they have involved in the care, however many resources they have involved in care. But usually what I've seen is when somebody is to that point where they're almost bedridden or very close to being bedridden. The other thing I see is when somebody starts to get in a wheelchair full time, and that's usually due to the house setup. So if there's stairs or they can't get in and out of the car anymore, I mean, with Alzheimer's disease, what I've seen, and this is just my professional opinion, so again, that's why there's no set standards, but in my professional opinion, it has a lot to do with mobility with Alzheimer's disease. And the good news, bad news with that is that it's going to get to be poor mobility in the end, but it is in the end, so it's in the last stages, it's the last few stages, and it's the last few years. So the great news is that the person with Alzheimer's can age at home and live at home in a familiar environment for a pretty long time. It just depends on the resources and the home setup and all of those things I mentioned, how long they can stay there. We do have people that stay there till the end and die in their homes on hospice. That's absolutely a possibility as well. So again, it just depends on the scenario, but the most common time I've seen the transfer happen to a facility is when it's more of a skilled situation and it's very intense mobility issues.
Okay, Molly, do you know of any 24-hour hotline or help phone lines that we can give to caregivers who might need support?
You know what? I don't know that number off the top of my head. It's the Alzheimer's Association's 24-hour hotline is the one that we use in that app. Steve, I can look that up quick and send it to you, Steve, and it could be included maybe on that last page with the resources so that everybody has that number handy. Or if you guys just Google Alzheimer's Association, the number should pop up. Or if you downloaded the app while we were talking on the phone, you can find that phone number in the app as well. Would that be okay, Steve?
So, sure. So it's the number for the Alzheimer's Association.
Well, it's there. It's a special hotline number, though. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, and someone just texted in Alzheimer's Association hotline is 800.
Oh, there you go.
272-3900, and I'll repeat that here. 800-272-3900. So thanks for texting that in. That is the Alzheimer's Association hotline. Okay, the next question here, Molly. I love the idea of Alzheimer's-friendly businesses, which presumably will include places, such things as a quiet space and educated employees. How responsive are large businesses such as grocery stores?
You know, it's interesting. Since we've started to do some training here at Home Instead on that, we've had a really good response. Aaron, I know you're on the call. I don't know if you have specific numbers on that you can share.
I believe Aaron had to depart a little bit early.
Oh, so. Okay. So, what I will say is we've had some great successes with the businesses and with the grocery stores. Here's one thing I know that we've learned for sure. It's sometimes easier to start at the your local, we have a certain grocery store, and there's like 10 of them in Omaha. But there's probably, I don't know how many in the Midwest, 200 or something. So we're not going to go to the corporate office and try to get the training through. We're going to go to our local, grocery store that we have a relationship with and start there. And then maybe go to the next grocery store and start at the neighboring grocery store, which is a little bit of work. But from there, when you get a couple of them on board, that's when they might go to the corporate office and say, hey, all of us need to be trained on this. And the thing about the training is it's very simple. It's a half-hour training. So it's not this like 10-hour training class that somebody has to take. And so when you present it in a way like that, it's really and this is really just the first step. It's just a 30-minute training. So when you present it in a way of, this would just be an easy 30-minute deal, then a lot of stores, and we've not had a lot of doors closing on us, is not interested in getting this extra training.
Okay, more of a comment here, but we're going to spin this a little bit. Thank you for showing us how to describe what is happening using positive terms versus negative. Can you talk a little bit more about that, Molly, the approach of working with those afflicted with Alzheimer's or dementia, the positive versus the negative? How can we manifest that and work on that front?
Right. Well, I think it's a conscious effort to do that, and like I said, this is one of those things that we're going to have to practice and get used to. I am been using these terms for a few years now, and I'm just getting used to them, but I still could hear myself slipping up a little bit. But I think the thing is that the Alzheimer's disease, we know it's not good. We know it's hard. We know it's a terrible thing. But there are ways we've got to sell the positive of this, because so many people are going to be afflicted by it. So we've got to be able to sort of change the way that we talk about this disease, because you know what, guys? All we have is the care that we're providing right now. We don't have a cure. We could be years from a cure. I hope we're not, but we're probably a lot of years away from a cure. So this is the way that we can make the biggest impact, and the way that we can really change people's perception and people's attitude going into being a caregiver, and then people's attitude in the community. When I've talked to people about Alzheimer's disease, and everybody, they turn their nose up and they get so nervous, and it's like, no, wait a second, this is the deal. And when you explain things that we all have an unmet need, and that all we have to do not all we have to do. I know I make it sound easy, but we have to understand what that need is, and then we have to find a way to help the person meet that need. It seems very doable. And it's like, oh, I can do this. Oh, this doesn't have to be a scary thing. And, oh, my loved one can have a good life. They still can be engaged in the world. So I think it's going to take a village. It's going to take all 500 of you or however many are out there today on this call. It's going to take all of us to really change the notion and change this mentality and keep trying to really put more of a positive spin on this than just the negative effects of this disease, and because it's devastating. But and that's what, whenever I read the media or the news or websites or articles, I cringe now because of all the negativity throughout these articles. So I think we're on the right track. If all of you are appreciating that comments in the conversation today, I feel really positive about the future.
Okay, Molly, we had another person text in the name of the Glenn Campbell documentary that you were talking about earlier. It's called I'll Be Me.
I'll Be Me. Yeah, I'll Be Me.
Yeah, I'll Be Me. So if you want to check that out, I've heard good things about it. I haven't seen it myself, but I have heard some good things about it. So I'll Be Me is the Glenn Campbell documentary.
I'll Be Me. Yep, and it's really entertaining. There's a lot of great information. Again, it doesn't make Alzheimer's disease so scary. Again, that's one of the most positive things about that movie, I will definitely say. I thought it was great.
All right. Next question. Have you heard someone say, I don't want screening because I don't want to be the person, quote, labeled with dementia? How would you address this?
Wait, what was the first part? I don't want screening. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I don't want screening, yeah.
Yes. I have heard that. And I guess I definitely understand where the person's coming from. But the thing about memory loss and any of those signs that were on that list, they can be a different disease. It can be a medication you're taking. So I guess my answer back would be, I don't want you to have a label either, but we need to figure out what's going on, because it could be preventable, it could be treatable, it could be curable, whatever it is that's causing the memory loss or one of those signs. So that's one thing to consider. But second of all, I know, being labeled, I think that's in the beginning, I don't think I know everybody sort of shies away from saying, hey, guess what, I have Alzheimer's now. But it does take some time to really firm up the diagnosis. It can even take a few years. I don't know. I guess I haven't heard that argument lately about being nervous about being labeled because of it just takes so much time to actually get the, quote, diagnosis. But I guess, again, if we're selling why it's so important, planning, getting your affairs in order. If I had however many family caregivers I've talked to in my life, I swear one of the highest, most common themes I hear is, I wish I would have known sooner so that I could get my financial and legal affairs in order. I mean, that's the biggest thing I've heard from family caregivers when it comes to that. So again, I know it's hard when somebody says that, but we just have to stick to our guns about why it is so important to get that screening.
Okay, good point. Well, Molly, we have just about reached the end of our hour here, and we are just out of time. But I want to thank you for joining us today for a fantastic presentation and lots of great information. Thank you again.
Thank you, and thanks, everybody.